The PlayStation 1 had a wealth of great JRPG titles: Final Fantasy VII, Suikoden, Suikoden 2, Vagrant Story, Dragon Quest VII, Alundra, Wild Arms 3, Chrono Cross. The list goes on and on and on. While many of those series appeared earlier on consoles such as the NES and the SNES, for many of us here in the West, our first introduction to them was on the PlayStation 1. And although some of them have had continued success, pumping out sequel after sequel, such as Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, far too many of them dropped off the map and sadly became candidates for my What Happened To series. And for some of them, they deserved a much better ending than they got. It still gives me nightmares that some of my favourite series ended up as pachinko machines. And the focus of this video is a series that should have had a far better send-off, or more preferably, still be with us. Hello everyone, I'm Roy McCoy, and welcome to this episode of What Happened To. And this time we're looking at the history and future of Breath of Fire. Before we get started, please don't forget to like this video as it really helps it to get seen. And please follow me on Twitter at RealRoyMcCoy so you know when my videos are dropping and other things that I'm up to. But now, without further ado, let's talk about Breath of Fire. Our story begins in the year 1993 when Capcom unleashed Breath of Fire on the world. Well, at this point just Japan, with North America in 1994 and Europe missing out until 2001 when it launched on the Game Boy Advance. Seriously, why are we always last? The Japanese and North American versions were released on the SNES and is a traditional top-down JRPG and features turn-based combat. Taking place in a fantasy world, the main protagonist is a boy called Ryu, who is one of the last surviving members of the Light Dragon clan, a group who have the ability to transform into dragons. The story focuses on Ryu's search for his sister. During the game, he meets like-minded companions and fights against the Dark Dragon clan, a militaristic empire who want to revive a mad goddess and control the world. In fact, in every Breath of Fire game except for one, the name Ryu actually translates into English as the word dragon, which makes sense. And while they are all different incarnations of Ryu, they do share some similar traits, for example, blue hair. And I said you get to play as Ryu in all but one game, which is the final game, the 6th game, which we'll talk about towards the end, in which you take control of one of the siblings of Ryu. The game was designed by Yoshinori Kawano and produced by Tokuro Fujiwara, who had previously created the Ghosts and Goblins games. When the game came out in North America, it was made available by Squaresoft, which is why that name appears on the box cover and not Capcom. Having released in 1993, it predates Metacritic by around 8 years. So we'll go with this. IGN gave it a 7.6, Game Informer 8 out of 10, and Nintendo Power 4 out of 5. As I mentioned earlier, Europe did not get a look in till 2001 on the Game Boy Advance, and that version has a Metacritic score of 79%. The game was well received and sold well enough to encourage Capcom to make a sequel, Breath of Fire 2. The game released on the SNES on December 2nd, 1994 in Japan, a year later in North America on December 10th, 1995, and bringing up the rear was Europe on April 25th, 1996. Well, at least we got a version this time. The Japanese and North American versions were made and published by Capcom, while Laguna were responsible for publishing in Europe. The game follows another character called Ryu, however a different Ryu to the first game as it's set 500 years later. Top-down visuals and turn-based combat return, as does Ryu's membership to the Light Dragon clan, which allows him to transform into a dragon once more. Many of the original team worked on the project and the game was well received. IGN gave it an 8.3 and said the storyline and characters make Breath of Fire 2 a much better game than the first adventure in the series, even though the game hasn't changed a whole lot. GameSpot gave it a 7.7 and Nintendo Power a 3.1 out of 5. Interestingly, the game released in Japan around the same time as the PlayStation 1, where the next title in the series would appear. There was also a re-release on the Game Boy Advance in 2001, which has a score of 79 on Metacritic. We had to wait 3 years till 1997 until Japan got Breath of Fire 3, with the North American and European versions coming a year later. It's a traditional CRPG, and surprise surprise, the story focuses on a character called Ryu. His quest in this fantasy world populated by humans and anthropomorphic creatures is to find out what happened to the brood and find his surrogate family. There was also something called the Master System, allowing characters to be customizable by making them apprentices to different masters found around the world. Random generated turn-based battles were the order of the day, and the game once again was received really well. PlayStation, the official magazine, called the game a must-buy. IGN said, for an RPG, Breath of Fire presents nothing incredibly new story-wise, however the way in which everything in the game is arranged and executed shows an incredible amount of attention to detail and depth. Breath of Fire 3 has a game ranking score of 74. Breath of Fire 3 also sold really well, selling over 650,000 copies in Japan and North America. Sadly, the figures are not available for Europe, but we can see that the series was flying high at this point. There was also a PSP version in 2005 in Japan, 2006 in Europe, and this time North America were the last, in 2016. However, the pinnacle of the series was yet to come. On April the 27th, the year 2000, in Japan, we got Breath of Fire 4. It released later in the year 2000 in North America on November the 28th, and a year later on August the 3rd, 2001 in Europe, back to the familiar position of being the last to get the games. In my mind, Breath of Fire 4 was undoubtedly the greatest entry in the series, and I would love to know which one you preferred and which one was your favourite. This time, Breath of Fire 4 follows the adventures of a young man called Bob. Only joking, once again, it's Ryu, and he has the power to transform into powerful dragons. This Ryu in this game must take on an awakened immortal emperor and stop them from ascending and destroying the world. Turn-based battle sequences are back, and there's also a mix of 2 and 3D graphics, much like in Breath of Fire 3. And as well, the Master System, which I spoke about during Breath of Fire 3, also returned. Breath of Fire 4 was well received during its original release in Japan. In Japan, the game was the best seller of July 2000, and in the Japan region alone sold well over 330,000 copies in the year 2000. The Metacritic score with which it stands is the highest of all of the Breath of Fire series, and has a score of 83%. And for me, as I said before, it is arguably the greatest entry into the series. I would love to know if you agree or disagree with me. And it's quite clear to me that at this point the series was going really well. 4 very well received games in a period of 7 years, and the series had generated a huge fan base. However, what came next seemingly proved to be a bit divisive. On November the 14th, 2002 in Japan, we got the 5th main game in the series called Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, which launched on the PlayStation 2. Once again, it followed that familiar pattern of next up was North America on February the 16th, 2003, and Europe bringing up the rear on November the 28th, 2003. Now, before I start talking about this, I often wonder if some developers have never heard the expression, "if it ain't broke, don't fix it." Why do developers seemingly decide to completely change a series? I can understand if something's got a bit stale, but we were just coming off the back of the highest Metacritic scored game of the series. First off, Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter seemed to lose its number in the North American and European versions. And that wasn't the only thing that had gone. The fantasy setting had been controversially replaced by sci-fi, 3D graphics, a setting underground in bunkers, and a tricky combat system to make matters even more interesting, which is described by Capcom as a combined real-time and turn-based combat. It felt for some that the only thing that actually returned was a character called Ryu. Most reviewers highlighted its differences and mostly enjoyed the combat system, but what most reviewers did argue is that it was a big detachment from what had made the game series successful. Seriously, if it ain't broke, people! And I'm going to make a little segue here onto another series done by Capcom, Dino Crisis. Dino Crisis 1, Dino Crisis 2, both really well received games, and then Dino Crisis 3 was set in space in the future with like a metal Tyrannosaurus Rex. Seriously? Why did you anyway. But back to Breath of Fire. The title would ultimately receive mostly positive reviews, with a 78% average score from the aggregate websites Game Rankings and Metacritic, and many fans did enjoy it, but for me it felt detached, and possibly the user metascore of 6.6 shows that some fans out there also found it a little bit difficult to love. That to say it wasn't a bad game, it was a decidedly good game, it just wasn't as great as what came before. And then, after that, things went quiet. All hopes for a sequel or a return to what made it great have seemingly diminished. We just didn't get any news for a very long time. There were a few app games released only in Japan. Among them was a card game and a fishing game app, which were connected to the Breath of Fire universe, but in relation to a main title in the series, merely silence. Also, it would be silly of me not to mention that there were of course re-releases on formats such as the PSP, and the fans were made to wait. Until 2016, and the world got... Wait, no, only Japan got Breath of Fire 6, an app game. Now, I can understand why app games can be good to market a series, but for me, this should not have been the final resting ground of a beloved franchise. About the Breath of Fire 6 app game, well, it was a free-to-play online web-based multiplayer role-playing video game with microtransactions that Capcom published only in Japan. The game takes place around 1,000 years after an apocalyptic battle between the Light and Dark Dragon clans, and the players assume the role of a customizable male or female hero who is the sibling of Ryu. Now, I've never played this. Let me know in the comments if you have, but sadly, it was only released in Japan. And the next piece of news about the series is in 2017, all online operations were ceased and the game was effectively shut down. And that's it. Gone. So for Europe and North America, the last main entry was 2003, and nothing for 18 years, apart from an app game in Japan that we heard about. So that brings me on to the most important question. Could we ever see another one? I said at the start that some series deserve to have better endings, or preferably still be with us, and this is one of them. While 5 was divisive, it was at least interesting and playable, but to peter out with a few app games before ending up as a web-based ARPG app with microtransactions seems really sad. Capcom have proven they can remake games well, but for me, I can't see Breath of Fire coming back for a long time, and I really hope I'm wrong, because it pains me to say that. I love this series. I have enjoyed every single one of the Breath of Fire games. While 5 wasn't as great as 4, I still enjoyed it. But the impression I kind of get is that Capcom see this as a tricky franchise that they don't think would sell well. But in my opinion, I feel that if they did a classic CRPG that was top-down with turn-based battles, fans would lap it up. And for me, there is one glimmer of hope. And it ties in with my hope of Suikoden coming back, and that is Eiyuden. The spiritual successor to Suikoden could be the answer. If that game proves a massive hit, and I hope it is, and in fact, already if you look at the Kickstarter funding, it has been already successful, it may pave the way for more games like Breath of Fire to come back. And as I said before, I really hope I'm wrong and there is a Breath of Fire 7 in the works. And I have never so desperately wanted to be wrong. But for now, all it leads me to say is thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you have any other suggestions for other game series you'd like me to cover. But this is Roy McCoy, out!